Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to part 1 to my platformer shooter tutorial series. In this series, it's going to be aimed towards beginners. I'm going to be using GameMaker Studio 2, and I'm also going to be using the trial version of GameMaker Studio 2. So we will have limited resources, but that's okay. We should still be able to make a pretty cool game, even with the limited resources. Let's get started. First, I'm going to click New and GameMaker Language Project. I'm going to name this Platformer Shooter. And that will open up to our workspace right here. First thing we're going to do is create a new sprite. I'm going to leave it at, I'm going to make it 3232. And I'm going to paint it blue. It's going to be our character sprite for now. We can close out of this up here and just name it S_player. I'm going to duplicate this sprite. And the duplicate I'm going to open up and name this one S_solid. And it looks like it somehow grabbed the wrong file. Double click on this again. Come into here. And I'm going to just make it a dark gray color for the solid. Okay, we're good to go. We've got our player and our wall. We can close out of both of these. I'm going to create a new object and name this O_player. I'm going to take a different approach to this. Let's rename this room as well. I'm going to right click and do rename. We'll name it R_1. And the approach that I'm going to take in this series is kind of a trial and error approach. So I'm going to make some mistakes intentionally and kind of lead you guys along the problem solving process as we create this game. So let's create an event, and I'm going to add a step event right here. Inside this step event, we're going to handle the movement for the player. So let's make a comment here up at the top. You can just leave that where it says description and make this player movement. And for the movement, we're going to have a horizontal speed and a vertical speed. But let's actually create those variables in a create event first. So add an event, create. And you can see when we have two events, we can see the code for each event right here at the top, tabbed like this, and that's pretty convenient. So we're going to name this one create the variables. And we'll just do h speed. And the way that I'm going to do these variables is I'm going to put an underscore at the end of the variable, because GameMaker has built-in variables like hspeed like this. And in order to get around that, I'm putting an underscore at the end of the variable. Now you want to be careful, because if you accidentally don't put the underscore at the end, then you'll get the wrong variable. But GameMaker Studio 2 luckily has syntax highlighting, and it prioritizes the variables that you've created. I guess it has auto completion, and it prioritizes the variables that you've created. So we're going to set our horizontal speed to 0, and then we're going to make a vSpeed underscore and set that equal to 0 as well. Now that we have both of these variables, let's jump back into our step event, and we can say if keyboard check VK right. So if the right key is pressed, then we're going to put some brackets here. Put a bracket here and a bracket here. Got our two brackets. If the right key is pressed, then we're going to say hspeed. And you can see there's two variables here. There's the built-in variable, and then there's the variable we created, and it prioritizes the variable we created. So we're going to select that one. hspeed equals 4. Then we're going to say else if keyboard check VK left, hspeed equals -4. So we'll move to the left. Then finally, manipulating this variable doesn't actually do anything, because we're not applying it to the character's movement. So the character doesn't actually move if we just manipulate this variable. It's just, oh, you change the horizontal speed, but we never actually make the character move using that horizontal speed. So at the end of this, what we need to do is we need to say x plus equals h speed, like this, and then do a semicolon at the end of that. Now it will add our current horizontal speed to our x position every single frame. So if we come into our room and we need to assign a sprite to our player here first, so let's assign the blue sprite. When we come into our room, I'm going to change the room setting, so down here at the bottom it's got height and width. I'm going to make these 640 by 360, and we can click and drag our player into this room and then press play to run the game. And you can see if we press right or left, we move, but we don't actually stop moving. So how do we make it so the character stops moving? Well, let's go back in here. And one way to do this is just to add another else h speed equals 0. So if we're not pressing right and we're not pressing left, then we set our horizontal speed equal to 0. We can run the game again and see how this works. And you can see now we can stop. So we'll leave that code for now. That's looking pretty good. I'm going to minimize this right here. Now let's see what would happen if you accidentally had a typo in your h speed. So let's say you typed h speed and there was a mistake in it. First of all, it won't autocomplete the variable at first. You saw that it went gray. But then GameMaker thinks that it's actually a variable that you've created. So if we run the game like this, we're going to get an error message because this variable hasn't been created yet. And you can see we've got an error message here. Now, as you're using GameMaker Studio 2 and as you're learning to make games, it's really important to learn to read error messages. I get a lot of messages and emails for people asking me to help them with the error messages they've gotten. And a lot of the time, it's right in the error message. And they can just read through it and discover what the issue is by reading the error message. Now they look a little bit cryptic, and I think that's what puts people off, is because it's, you know, all these weird symbols, and it's just a little bit weird to look at this. But it tells us actually exactly what's going on. So you can see there's a fatal error in action number 1 of step event. So we're inside the step event, and there's a fatal error in the step event, and then it says variable object player dot hsped, which is where we spelled this wrong right here, not set before reading it. So it's saying this variable, you're trying to use this variable, but it was never actually created. We didn't set it before reading it. And then it actually tells us the line. So object player step line 11. And you can see, oh look right there at line 11. That's exactly where we were. So we can abort this message and we can know that there's an issue right there and we can fix it and run the game, and we should be good to go now. No more error messages, just like before. Now we want to add collisions, so let's create a new object. I'm going to right click on objects over here to create, and I'm going to name this O_solid. We'll use this object for our collisions. We'll assign the solid sprite to it, and we actually don't have to do anything else with it. We just have to create it, and that's it. We do want to put a few in our room though, and I'm going to click and drag this into the room. And then once an object's in the room, you can select it, and then if you grab right on the corner, you should get this symbol right here, and you can drag it down and create a wall. So we're going to do that. We're going to create some walls. If you drag over each one, and we'll create a wall here and a wall here at the top as well, and we'll create a wall here on the side as well. So I've got these walls. I might put a few in here in other places just to make this a little bit interesting. And we can run the game. However, our character can still move through these walls. So we need to make sure that the character doesn't move through the walls. So let's go into our player object again. And I'm going to press this over here to get rid of the room editor information. Actually, the easiest way to do this is to press this to get rid of everything. This button up here will get rid of all the extra sidebars. Once we've done that, before we move our object by moving its X position, we can check to make sure that there's not a wall in the way. And the way that we do this is with a function called place meeting. So we're going to say if place meeting, then we're going to do X, that's our current X position, plus H speed. Make sure you select this variable and not the one without the underscore, comma, Y. And down here at the bottom, when we're using this function, we get little helpers. So we've got X and Y, and the last one's the object that we want to check for. Well, we want to check to see if we're going to run into a solid object, O underscore solid. Okay. And I'm going to actually bring this bracket up here. I generally tend to do my brackets like this. You want to make sure that your brackets are matched up. They each have the pair, and if you click on them like this, it will highlight the other one so you can see the pair for each bracket. Let's actually pretend that we forget this bracket right here. So we just come down and we do a bracket like that. And we forget our bracket up here. If we click on this bracket, it's going to say that there's not a pair to it. And you can also see GameMaker is going to tell us there's an error here. It's like you've got a bracket, but there's actually there's not a pair to it. You know, it doesn't have the opening bracket. So we're going to know, okay, we need to put a bracket here. And I highly recommend formatting your code carefully like this so that you don't run into errors as you're programming. And sometimes you can even have an opening bracket. Like what if we had an extra bracket up here? Right here. And then we didn't have this one. Well, GameMaker's actually going to think that this bracket has a pair. Now it doesn't really work because our if statement here has issues and stuff. But see, it actually thinks these are a pair, and that's not what we want. So we'll put our bracket right back here. So if there's a place meeting at X plus H speed, we know that there's a solid object in the way, so we can't move there. So what we're going to do is we're going to set H speed equal to 0. That way, even though we're adding to our X position, it's actually only going to just add 0, which means we won't move anymore, because our horizontal speed will be equal to 0. And you can see now we can't move into these walls. We can move up against them, but we can't move into them. Now currently our speed is at 4, but what if we had a speed of 5? You're going to see an issue here. Maybe. Yeah. See how we can't move right up against that wall? There's a little bit of a space before we get to that wall. And if we were to do a bigger number here, instead of 5, if we did something like 11, there might be even a bigger space next to that wall. And you can see, yeah, there's kind of a big gap there. The reason is because our place meeting here is checking over 11 pixels. So it's saying, yeah, there's a collision 11 pixels over, set our horizontal speed to 0. But we're actually not up against the wall yet. So the solution to this problem, to making sure that we continue to move up against the wall, is a while loop. And what this does is it says, while we're not quite touching the wall, move us over by 1 pixel. So let's do that. While not place meeting, X plus sine H speed, Y object solid, make sure you do your brackets, X plus equals sine H speed. So how does this work? Well, sine, this function right here, it sounds kind of tricky, but all it really does is it takes this, which is either a positive 11 or negative 11, and it says if you're positive, then I'm going to be 1. If you're negative, then I'm going to be negative 1. So it gives us either a positive 1 or a negative 1 based on whether or not this number is positive or negative. But the benefit of that is we get to check over a single pixel in whatever direction we're heading. And then if there's not a wall there, then we move over by a single pixel again. And so we're able to move up against that wall. Now if we run the game again and check this, you can see we can now move right up against the wall, even with this faster speed. Now we're going to imitate this same collision method right here, but we're going to do it for our v speed that we created. So we're going to say if place meeting x, y plus v speed, object solid, put our brackets there, while not place meeting x, y plus sine v speed, object solid, y plus equals sine v speed, and after that bracket, in the same way that we had before, v speed equals 0. And then at the very end, we'll do y plus equals v speed. Now this collision system is pretty common. A lot of different programmers use it. And it's a good way to get started as a beginner with a very solid collision system that works. It won't work for angles, like you can't do slopes really easily with this, but it does work for the type of game that we're making right now. So this is what we're going to use. Now, you want to make sure and manipulate your horizontal speed or vertical speed up here at the top. So let's add some gravity to our game to make it a little bit more interesting. Come into the create event and we're going to add gravity here. We're going to say gravity, and you can see there's a built-in variable gravity. So I'm going to do an underscore at the end again, equals 1. Now that we have our gravity, we need to apply it to our object. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to have another check. If not place meeting x, y plus 1. So that will check 1 pixel below us for the solid object. Solid. We're going to say v speed plus equals gravity. And make sure you do the one with the underscore at the end. Now we can run our game and we should have working gravity as well. And there you go. We've got working gravity. Now we can't jump yet, and let's add that in. So if this right here, this check basically checks to see whether we're on the whether we're not on the floor. So if there's not an object 1 pixel under us, we know that we're in the air. But we can add an else to this. Else if keyboard check, I'm going to do keyboard check pressed, VK up. So if we press the up key, V speed equals negative, and we can set whatever we want our jump to be. So let's say our jump is 16. V speed equals negative 16, and let's run the game. And there you go. We have basic working platformer physics. They don't really feel that great right now because it feels a little bit jumpy. Our movement to the right and to the left is instantaneous. Actually really quite fast too, because we've got our 11 right here. So that's pretty fast. So we're going to change some of these things to make the game feel a little bit better. Let's come into our create event again and add some new variables. I'm going to add an acceleration variable. And I'm going to name this acceleration, I'm going to set this acceleration variable equal to 1. Then I'm going to create a jump height variable. and I'm going to do an underscore on all these, by the way. I'm going to set this equal to negative 16. So we've created some new variables here. Let's come back into our step event, and we're going to change the way that we handle our input a little bit. And one of the ways that we can get our horizontal speed and vertical speed, one way that we can optimize this code right here is to say var, and this creates a temporary variable, input, and I'm going to actually name this h input equals keyboard check vk right minus keyboard check vk left, semicolon. Now what this does is if we're pressing the right key, this will be a 1. If we're pressing left key, this will be a 1. If we're not pressing the right key, it will be a 0. If we're not pressing the left key, it will be a 0. So our h input is going to be equal to either 1 minus 0 or 0 minus 1. So it's going to end up being either positive 1 or negative 1 based on which one of these we're pressing. If we're pressing both of them, it's actually going to be 0 as well. So if they're pressing both left and right, our h input will be equal to 0. Now that we have our horizontal input like this, what we can do is get rid of that code, and we can say if h speed equals, actually we want to check our input. If h input does not equal 0, we want to add to our h speed. H speed plus equals h input, okay, which is either a 1 or a negative 1, times acceleration. So this is going to add our acceleration to our horizontal speed in the direction that our input is, whether it's 1 or negative 1. So if it's negative 1, it's going to subtract, right? Now we want to make sure that we don't go over a max speed though, because this will accelerate forever. And I can show you that right now. If we run the game, we're going to be able to accelerate quite quickly. And it does feel a little bit slow too, but we could technically never accelerate to an infinite speed. And we don't want that. We want a max speed. So come back into the create event. I'm going to name this max underscore h speed underscore equals 6. I'm going to give us a max h speed of 6. So come back into the step event. Then we can say right here, h speed equals clamp h speed, and then we give it a minimum value. So we're going to say negative max h speed, and then a maximum value, and we'll say positive max h speed. Now, if you ever forget to do one of your underscores there, it's going to show up green. We don't want to see green variables here unless it's x and y, because the green variables are built in. So make sure that you always have your underscore there and that they're showing up this blue color. Okay, now we've clamped it, but there's actually no deceleration. So we're gonna create a deceleration here as well. And we're gonna use a function called lerp for this. And what that does is it will linear interpolate, which basically just means it approaches a target value by a percentage. And so we want to approach 0, and we're going to use a small percentage like 20% or 30%. So we'll say h speed. And we're doing this in the else because if our input is equal to 0, then we know that we want to decelerate. So we'll say h speed equals lerp h speed. That's the first value. The second value is the target value, and we want to approach 0 because we're decelerating. And the amount that we're going to do is a percentage. And so I'm going to do 0.3 just to test and see how that feels. Okay. Now our acceleration is kind of slow, but I think I'm going to fix that because we're going to actually end up changing the game speed. But there, you can see we now have a lot smoother movement for our character. We have an acceleration and then we decelerate as well. And we've got nice collisions working for us. So this is looking pretty good. Now we're going to step away from coding for just a second. You might want to save your game. And we're going to move to our game settings. And if you come into configurations, I think that's where it is. Might be in options. Yeah, under options, main. If you double click on that, you can see our game frames per second. Let's set this to 60 frames per second. Hit apply. Now when we run our game, it should be quite a bit faster because we're running it at twice the speed. And it just feels snappier. Feels like we've got tighter, it's a tighter platforming controls, quite a bit snappier than it was before. And you might change your values still. I think maybe gravity might be a little bit fast, so I'm going to do 0.7. Let's do actually 0.5. And my jump height might be a little bit too high now, so I'm going to do -12 instead. And we want to make sure to actually use those because the jump height is still just hard-coded here. So come back into the step event and set this vSpeed equals jump height. There we go. I think everything else we're using though. And we can run the game. And that's feeling pretty good. Our movement speed, our max movement speed still might be a little fast. Let's actually create a variable here for our friction amount too. So I'm going to name this friction underscore so we don't get the built-in friction. We don't want to use that. Come into the create event and we'll create our friction here. Friction underscore equals 0.3. That seemed like a pretty good value. And let's change our max horizontal speed to 4 instead of 6. And these values, I'm just tweaking. I'm just kind of tweaking these values to get something that I like. We still can jump pretty high. So maybe -8 is better. But this is looking pretty good so far for our platformer. And these, obviously you'll change these and to get something that you like the way it feels. Because 8 doesn't really jump that high. Now that we've done that, the last thing we want to do is kind of make it so that our game doesn't look so tiny. So we're going to scale up the port of our game. So come into your room, double click on it, and we have room settings down here, and they're kind of small. I'm not going to lie. So I'm going to move these up a little bit so we can see room settings just a little bit better. Like this. We actually don't really need to see instance properties right now. So I'm going to you can just click that right there to bring that up. Now we can see our room settings a little bit better. We want to click on viewports and cameras. We want to do enable viewports and go to viewport 0. Click on that one. We're going to make this one visible. And you can see now it's created this giant viewport in our room so we can see this box that it's drawing. And we want its width to be the same width as our room here. So we're going to do 640. And we want its height to be the same height, which is 360. But we want to actually scale this viewport so that when we run the game, it will show the game at twice the size. So this is the width and height. That's the size of the camera in the room. But we want to change the viewport properties now that we've got the width and height set. We want to set these to double. So I'm going to do 1280 and 720. It's the same aspect ratio, we've just doubled the numbers. Now when we run the game, our game window will be twice as big because the viewport changes the window size. And if we come back into our player, I'm going to change the jump height to 10 so we've got a little bit extra jump height. And click this to get rid of all those extra windows we have. Save the game. Now we're looking pretty good, but this is a platform shooter, and a lot of people like to use the ASDW keys for that. So what we need to do is we need to map the keys. So it's been a while since I've actually done this, so I'm going to actually look it up in the help. If we click the help right here, it'll open up the help, and let's search key. Let's go into index and search. So we've got searched key here. And I think what we want is keyboard set map right here. Okay, I can't, oh, we need to click display, I guess. I tried double clicking, it didn't seem to work. So this should map two keys together. This is the key that key 1 is to be mapped to. This is the key that is to be mapped. Let's see how they use it. So if we want to map the A key to the left key, this is how it would be done. Keyboard set map. I'm guessing we can do this in the create event. So let's come back into our workspace in the create event, and we're going to map the keys. So keyboard map, keyboard key, keyboard set map. That was what it was. Okay. And so the key we want to map is the D key. So we'll do ORD, and then we'll do D. I actually think the documentation might be, oh, they're using double quotes. So we'll want to make sure and use double quotes. Come back into our workspace from the help, and we're going to use double quotes here. Okay, so we'll map the D key to VK right. Now they should essentially do the same thing. Let's double check and make sure. Yep, now I can press the D key to move to the right as well. If I press both of them, I don't move twice as fast. It just moves to the right still. So that's what we need to do. We need to map the other keys now too, so let's copy this. And the other key we want to map is we want to map the W key to VK up, right? And we want to map the S or the A key to VK left. And finally, we want to map the, let's do it the way that people generally say it. We want to map the S key to VK down, even though we're not using it yet. Okay, so that's how you can map these keys so that both will work. And now in our game, we should be able to use the WASD keys to move our character as well. And that's looking really good. Finally, the next step we're going to take, and this is the last one that we're going to do in this video, is we're going to make our gun, and we're going to make it follow the player to an extent. So let's create a new sprite. We'll name this S_gun, and I'm going to set its width and height here. So click on the width and height. For the width, I'm going to set it to 32, and for the height, I'm going to set it, except you need to make sure and unclick maintain aspect ratio right here. But for the height, I'm going to set it to 8. Apply. And that will get us this kind of gun shape right here. And then we can click edit image. And I'm going to make it white for now, just so that it stands out really easily. And close out. Come back. Let's close out of the help now. And our room. And it's important, this origin right here on the gun and both our player are kind of important, and I'll show you why in just a minute. Open up the player object. We're going to add a new event. We're going to add a draw event. Right here, if I can find it, draw. Okay, we're going to call this draw the gun. And in this event, we can draw the gun sprite on our player object. So we're going to do that. We'll say draw sprite. That's the function we want to use. The sprite we're going to use is S_gun. And where are our helpers? We can't see our helpers because our window's too big. But here are our helpers. So the next thing we need is our sub image. We're just going to say 0 because if you look at our gun sprite right here, there's only one image here. And so since GameMaker starts counting at 0, we just say 0. Let's close out of these. And then we need our X and Y position. Well, we want to draw at the player's X position and the player's Y position. Semicolon. And it's saying there's an error here. It's because I forgot a comma. So this is a great learning opportunity. You can see I've got an error here. If I hover over it, it says number of arguments expected 4, but got 2. It's a little confused there because technically we passed in 3, I think. But basically you can see that there's an error here, and if we look through, I've got a comma, but no comma here. So we know we need a comma. Now let's run the game. And we don't have a player. It's drawing the gun in the room like we wanted it to, but we don't have the player. The reason is because GameMaker has a default draw event that draws the player, or draws whatever object that it needs to, right? In this case, we're the player, so it has a default draw event, even though it doesn't show it before. When we create our own draw event, it removes the default one. So we're no longer drawing the player anymore, we're just drawing the gun. So what we want to do is there's a function called draw self, parentheses, semicolon. And this will draw the current object how it needs to. And if we run the game, you can see now we're drawing the player. But where'd the gun go? We're still drawing the gun, so where'd it go? Well, what's happening here is that the order that you draw things in, or the order that you write the code in here, matters. Things that are drawn first are drawn behind things that are drawn later. So if we actually copy this right here, so I'm just going to do Control X and then enter Control V and put that first. Save the game. You can see we'll draw the player first and then we'll draw the gun on top of the player. And now we've got our player and our gun. But the gun isn't positioned very well. It actually looks really bad to have the gun like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to, the way to fix that, you could manipulate the gun's position here manually, but we're eventually going to want to do this later anyways. We want to set the player's origin. So let's set the player's origin. Instead of to top left, we're going to do it to middle center. That will set the origin of the player to the middle. Now when we draw the gun at the player's X position, it's actually going to draw it right here, because this is the origin of the player object. And when we run the game, you can see that's correct. And that's not too bad. That's not a bad position. If you want it to be exactly centered, then you'd go into your gun and set its origin to, let's see, where is it? Middle left, right here. Set it to middle left, and that draws that right there in the center of the gun. And we can come to our player sprite here just to get rid of that. We don't need it there anymore. Run the game. Stop the current exit. It looks like we left the other one running. Okay, we'll stop the other one and rerun it. That's what we want to do. And now we have it centered on our player. The player doesn't turn around yet, but that's okay. We're going to be fixing that in the next video. In the next video, I'll show you how to make the gun point towards the mouse inside of our game. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I'm excited for this series. Making a platformer shooter, I think, is a pretty good place to start if you're a beginner. Some of the collision stuff can be a bit tricky, but once you get that down, the rest of it's actually pretty easy to do and can be really fun. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.